In this week's Parshat we have a very amazing, one of the most amazing episodes, a few psukim we have in this week's Parshat. Pasuk says we all know that before Yaakov Avinu confronted Esav, before he made that confrontation with Esav, his brother, we know the Pasuk says a very mysterious thing. Yaakov Avinu crossed his family over a little stream, a little river. And in Kabbalah, this is a big inyan, the fact that he crossed them over. The Pasuk says, after he crossed his whole family over, very strange, Vayivasa Yaakov Lovadai, the Yaakov was left by himself. And Vayavik ish imay adalois hashachar, and another man wrestled with him until morning. Vayar kila yachaloi, and this man saw that he wasn't able to subdue Yaakov Avinu, but he was able to do one thing. Vayiga v'kaf yarecha, he was able to somehow injure Yaakov Avinu's thigh. He was able to somehow affect that. The take a kaf yarech Yaakov, and Yaakov Avinu's thigh became dislocated on some level as they were wrestling. And we go on, and again the pasuk goes on further, that after this mysterious man left, the pasuk says, Vayikra Yaakov Shem Lakum Upniel. The pasuk says, Vayizrach lo Hashemesh kasher avos pno. The Yaakov Avinu, as he passed a certain place, the sun shone on Yaakov Avinu. V'hotzalei yarech, and he was limping, and the sun healed his wound. That's what the pasuk says. Who is this man, B'chlal? So we all know the famous Chazal. Chazal saying Rashi brings it down. This was no human being. This was Sarah Shel Esav. This was the Malach of Esav, the Satan, Sam himself, the Satan himself. That this Satan came before Yaakov Avinu confronted the physical Esav, so the spiritual Esav, the Malach of Esav, came and fought with Yaakov and wrestled with him and was unable to subdue Yaakov Avinu himself, but was able to somehow cause problems to the thigh of Yaakov Avinu, to the Gid Hanosha, to the sciatic nerve of Yaakov Avinu. As the pasuk says, and Al Kain Lo Yochlu B'nei Yisrael, it's the Gid Hanosha, Ad Hayom Hazeh, and to this very day we don't eat the Gid Hanosha. The Gid Hanosha, that vein, we don't eat it when it comes to an animal. So what does this mean, B'chla? What's going on over here? Yaakov is wrestling with the Sarah Shel Esav, and somehow Esav is unable to subdue him except for this one inyan of somehow harming Yaakov Avinu's thigh. What's the inyan over here? So I want to talk to you something very fundamental. This is Aleph base, Mamish Aleph base, and it's something, again, we have to always hold on to this because we have to understand that all the suffering that we go through every single day, every struggle that we have in Yiddishkeit, it's a result of this damage that Yaakov Avinu had to his thigh. Every single thing that we struggle with, every problem that we have in Yiddishkeit is because of this episode. So you have to understand, and we have to figure out what's the antidote, what's the procedure to heal our thighs, to heal this problem, this Gid Hanosha. So listen, there's an old custom by many Jews that before they do a mitzvah, before they daven, before they learn, whatever the case may be, before they do anything positive, they say l'shem yichud. What's l'shem yichud? So they say l'shem yichud kutshabrichu shchinte. That what I'm doing right now, what I'm about to do, put on tzitzis, put on tefillin, daven, learn, whatever it might be, this should help to unite kutshabrichu, hakadosh baruch hu, ushchinte, and the shechina. We want to unite somehow by us doing mitzvahs and learning and living life according to halacha. We're somehow uniting Hakadosh Baruch Hu and the Shechina. So we're not with Kabbalim, and we're not going to get into Kabbalah, but we're going to learn this on our level. On our level, what does it mean for us people, simple people like us, connecting Hakadosh Baruch Hu and the Shechina? What does that mean? So listen to the words of Rav Tzadok HaKohen. Rav Tzadok writes this in the Sefer Kavim Tzamim. He writes as follows. He says like this: when it comes to Hashem, Hashem is one. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Hashem is one. But however, even though Hashem is one for sure, but there are many names that we have for Hashem. Many names, right? The main name we have Yud Kei Vav Kei. Yud Kei Vav Kei, we don't pronounce it, but Yud Kei Vav Kei we have a name for Hashem. There's another name that we say Adonai, right? Which means Hashem is the master. What's the difference? What are we describing when we're calling Hashem by Yud Kei Vav Kei and when we're calling Hashem with the name Adonai? What are we trying to connect to when we're calling him in these two distinct names? So listen to Rav Tzadok. Listen to Rav Tzadok. It sounds deep, but we're going to see this is halacha l'maisa. Rav Tzadok writes the following. When we call Hashem by Yud Kei Vav Kei, what we're talking about is Hashem. That name of Yud Kei Vav Kei is Shemayr His Spashtus Ar Yisbarach B'li Tachlis U'B'li Gvul. What we're talking about is that there's some aspect of Hashem. There's an aspect of Hashem who His light is so infinite and so overwhelmingly brilliant that it's without end, without any measure. And that's what the Gemara says in Psachim, that Shalom Ksiv, that's a name of Hashem that we don't pronounce explicitly. Because there's an aspect of Hashem which is so brilliant, and so overwhelming, and so clear, and so blinding, that in a day-to-day life it's very difficult to connect to that to that level of Hashem's presence, which is unbelievably deep and unbelievably overwhelming. Sometimes we connect to it. You know, the Rambam writes that when a person, how does a person come to love Hashem? How does a person come to love Hashem? You know what the Rambam says? The Rambam says a person has to sit, and he has to meditate, and you have to think about how awesome the world is. How infinite does the universe seem? How unbelievably great is the world that Hashem created? And the Baal Tanya says, you know how you love Hashem even deeper than that? When you realize that all that physical things, all the great galaxies and the universes, everything that's out there, all that unbelievable wisdom of Hashem, it's nothing compared to Hashem's presence, to Hashem's essence, to who Hashem really is. That infinite, that b'li tachas b'li gvul, that infinite presence of Hashem, that overwhelming light of Hashem, that overwhelming love that a Jew has for Hashem in his heart, it's unbelievable that all the great chachma, all the great universe and the galaxies that we see is nothing compared to it. That's what it means, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When we say Kutsharicha, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you know what the word HaKadosh means? HaKadosh means holy. What does holiness mean? When something is separate, that's holy. Right? A soda bottle is not holy. Why? Because you're so used to soda bottles, whatever. There's no, we're so comfortable with it. Something that's holy means that it's separate. HaKadosh Baruch Hu means that when we call Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu means that we're describing Him, that we're saying that Hashem, there's something about your presence, there's something about you that's so overwhelming that I don't feel. It feels completely separate from me. Sometimes we can tap into it. When a person says Shema, Ni'il on Yom Kippur, there are certain times, there are certain points in a Jew's life where they taste a little bit of that overwhelming presence of Hashem, that on an average day we don't feel. That's called Kutcher Brich, that's called HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem is unbelievably awesome. And that's a side of Him, so to speak, that's very difficult to tap into in the average day. There's another name that we have for Hashem. What's the other name we have for Hashem? Adonai, which means Hashem is our master, down here. Says Rav Tzadok, Zeu Shem HaAdonai. This is what it means when we call Hashem with the name Adonai. Shemayra Shehu Adon HaKol means that there's an aspect of Him that's not all the way out there. That doesn't seem, that we have access to besides, Rosh Hashanah, Nilan, and Kippur. Besides when we say Shema. The Heim Oivda, V'unikru Shechina. That's what it means, the divine presence. It means there's an aspect of Hashem that's giving us life right now. What does it mean? It means like this. When a person is in the middle of, in class in school, we might not think about it, we might not realize it, but even when a person is in that seemingly most secular place, outside of shul, outside of davening and learning, he's in the middle of class, and he's maybe learning about evolution. Not much the farthest thing from spirituality you could possibly imagine. But you know what the Shechina means? You know what the Shem Adonai means? It means that even at that moment, there is a presence of Hashem that's giving you life at that moment. There is a light of Hashem that's found within you that's giving you life, that's giving you energy. As we say this numerous times, that there is nothing in the world that exists without Hashem continuously pumping energy into it. And if a person is still alive, even at the time that he's doing an Aver Chas Hashem, if at that moment you're still breathing, it means that Hashem is with you and pumping life into you. The problem is that that aspect of Hashem is so difficult to become inspired from. That's the problem. The aspect of Hashem that's called Kutcher Brich, that's called separate, that's called unbelievably overwhelming, that we tap into on occasion, that's inspirational. That's the part of Hashem that we become inspired from, that at times when we come in contact with that, we want to become good Jews, we want to become holy people. The problem is that part of Hashem seems to be so different, so distinct, and so separate, and so far to reach and to tap into. The part of Hashem that we're comfortable with, what's called the Shekhinah, what's called the divine presence that resides in every single Jew no matter where he goes, that's uninspirational. That just gives us life and we just go on living. Not a big deal. When we say L'Shem Yichud, what we're asking for, what we're davening for constantly, is that these two worlds should be connected. That we should constantly be inspired by the presence of Hashem that's found within us every single moment. That's a very difficult thing. This is what it means. When we daven Shemona Esrei on a good day, we sometimes, when a person says Shema properly, when a person sometimes is faced with a terrible test and he overcomes it, and he conquers his Yetzer Hara, those are moments where a person feels that he taps into Kutcher Bricha, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, that infinite part of Hashem that's inspiring. The problem is that that's not the average 24/7. The average 24/7 is that we have Hashem's light in us, giving us energy, but it's uninspirational. It's not. We don't feel that connection to that awe-inspiring, overwhelming love that we should naturally have for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why is there that division? Why is it that we feel that sometimes we tap into that aspect of Hashem, that inspiring element, but the average day we don't? Where is that mechitza? Where is that division coming from? So Rav Tzadok goes on to say that division came from this episode with Yaakov Avinu. This episode of Yaakov Avinu. When the Malach of Esav was unable to overtake Yaakov himself, it means that Yaakov himself was always connected to that level of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of purely inspirational, infinite oneness with Hashem. And the Malach of Esav, when a person is in that situation, the Malach of Esav has no standing. He can't overwhelm Yaakov Avinu. What the Malach of Esav was able to do was to affect the thighs of Yaakov Avinu. What that means is as follows: that Yaakov Avinu, somehow by affecting his thighs, it meant that the mind of Yaakov Avinu, what Yaakov Avinu knows in his heart and mind, that inspirational tapping into that infinite part of Hashem, that infinite aspect, somewhere it stops. Somewhere there's a blockage. When Yaakov Avinu's thighs became dislocated, it means they weren't lined up properly with the upper part of his body. It means that the raglayim, the feet, those Jews that are connected to the feet, us, Ikvus the Mashiach, the last generation before Mashiach comes, it's so difficult to feel any inspiration from the heart and mind of Yaakov Avinu, because somewhere along the lines by the thighs of Yaakov there's a blockage. That's what it means. Listen to the Medrash. The Medrash writes on this episode, it says in the Medrash that the Malach of Esav was able to affect the thigh of Yaakov Avinu. So says the Medrash Naga, what generation, what type of Jew did this Malach have an effect over? Not Yaakov himself, but what type of Jew? Naga b'tzadikim u'b'tzadekas b'neviim u'nevias. It affected the tzadikim of later generations, shemasidim la'amiminu, which are going to be coming eventually from Yaakov Avinu. Ve'ezo zeh, and what generation is that? Zedar shel Shmad. That's a generation where there's difficulties in life, where the Goyim are overtly being anti-Semitic, or spiritually there's anti-Semitic, there's an anti-Yiddishkeit in the world. Zedar shel Shmad. Why? Because the blockage, that division, that sometimes we feel inspiration, sometimes we want to become good Jews, but the average day it's so difficult to feel anything. We feel dead. That's coming from the Gid Hanosha. That's coming from this dislocation of Yaakov Avinu. You know, Chazal say that we have 365 negative mitzvahs in the Torah. We have 365 lois essays. Each one corresponding to the day of the year. What day of the year is this lois essay of not eating the Gid Hanasha, what day of the year does that correspond to? So the Mekubalim say the day of the year that corresponds to this episode, this lois essay of the Torah, is Tisha B'Av. It's Tisha B'Av. Why? Because what's Tisha B'Av about? Listen to what Rav Tzadok writes. Rav Tzadok writes, this is what a Jew feels like on Tisha B'Av. Shenoi Gavelos, that we're all mourning, right? Tisha B'Av is the day where we all experience mourning. God forbid we shouldn't have any mourning from any loss to a family member, Chas v'Shalom, but we all, collectively, we have a mourning because we lost Yerushalayim, we lost the Beis HaMikdash. She'inyan Avelos Moyer, because the idea of mourning, what is mourning? What's the emotional response of someone who's sitting Shiva, Chas v'Shalom? He doesn't leave his home. He doesn't go to work. He doesn't learn. You sit as if you're dead. You feel nothing. You feel empty. That's the emotional feeling of someone who's sitting Shiva. Like what we say by the Kinnis on Tisha B'Av. Haras mimeni ve'eshev. One of the most famous Kinnis we say is that the crier of the Kinnis says, everybody just leave me, let me just sit and cry. Let me just, because I feel dead. I feel dead. That's what Avelis is. That's what Avelis is. You feel as if you're not productive, you're completely dead. As if this day, I just don't exist anymore. That's what an avel, that's what a mourner Chas v'Shalom feels. He wishes as if he wasn't alive. That's what the mourner feels. The mitzvah of Gid Hanasha is corresponding to the day of Tisha B'Av, because the day of Tisha B'Av, that means that every single one of us, there is going to be times where we feel dead. Sometimes we could feel dead for a week, for a month, for a year, a decade, 50 years. A person could feel like he's sitting Shiva. There's such a thing. And you might go, and it doesn't mean that you're going to be crying all day. The opposite. Sometimes you'll be in the greatest mood, and you'll have all the great, you'll have all the friends in the world. Everything will be fine. But there's a part of you that feels like you're sitting Shiva. There's a part of you that feels dead. That reality, that concept of having a Tisha B'Av, that there should be a Tisha B'Av in the world, and there should be a Tisha B'Av in the heart of a Jew, that there should be times where a person feels uninspired and disconnected from Hashem, that's coming from the Gid Hanasha. That's coming from this episode, the blockage. Every single one of us there, we know in our brains and our hearts what we're supposed to be doing. We know that we should be makbid about davening more. We know we should be makbid about Shabbos more. We know we have to maybe devote a little bit more time to learn. We have to learn Chumash a little bit better. A little bit here and there we have to improve. We know that in our heart and mind. But sometimes to get the feet listen to the heart and mind, it's very difficult. It's because of that block. Chazal say that the pasuk says, "Vayi'avik ish imai," that the Malach of Esav, the simple translation is that he wrestled with Yaakov Avinu. But Rashi brings down from Chazal that the word Vayi'avik comes from the word avak, which means dust. And Chazal say that from this wrestling match, the dust that came from the wrestling match floated up all the way to the Kis Yaakov, to the throne of Hashem's glory. So read that. What in the world does that mean? That the dust went to the Kis Yaakov? You know what that means? What does dust mean? It means that there was like a cloud of dust. If there's a cloud of dust in the air, it means you can't see through it, right? The cloud of dust that came from this struggle, this effect of the Malach of Esav over the thigh of Yaakov Avinu, sent up a dust cloud covering the Kis Yaakov, that every Jew down here tries to look and tries to constantly connect to the Kis Yaakov, but there's a blockage. That's what it means. Vayavik Yishimai. That's what it means. Vayavik Yishimai. The pasuk now tells us that eventually Yaakov Avinu was healed, which means Yesh Tikva Lachrisech, that we're hoping that there's going to be a day where Tisha B'Av will become a Yontif, the opposite. The opposite. But when Mashiach comes and the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt, then there's not going to be any separation between HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, and the Shekhinah. There's always going to be, a Jew will always be constantly inspired by the connection that he always has to Hashem. It won't be only on, Ne'ilah and Ne'ilah once every 10 years anyway. It's not going to be like that. It'll be constant. But the question is, what's the trick? What about until then? What about until then? So it's very difficult. It's very difficult. It's very difficult. And like I said, I said this before, Hashem built the world in such a way that this is the place of struggling. Hashem, there's no question. There's no question. Hashem wants us to struggle. Hashem wants us to deal with darkness. And once we recognize that this is also part of Hashem's plan, that we should be able to grow further and to strengthen ourselves with emunah and simple faith in Hashem, that gives a person chizuk. This is what Amalek is. This is what Amalek is. The pasuk says about Amalek. Amalek is the main descendant of Esav, right? The pasuk says about Amalek that Hashem said after Amalek attacked the Jewish people, Ki yad al keis ka, Milchama la Hashem b'Amalek midar dar, that the hand of Hashem says, so to speak, I swear, Ki yad, the hand of Hashem is al keis ka, is on His throne of glory, that I swear there's going to be a war against Amalek for every generation until Mashiach comes. So Chazal say, what does it mean, al keis ka? How do you spell the word throne? Kisei, kaf, samach, aleph. For some reason, when it comes to the context of Amalek, that aleph is missing. Kiyad al keis ka. The throne of Hashem is spelled without an aleph. What does that mean? It means that the word aleph always represents Hashem. It always represents aluf Hashem, that oneness, that kucharicho, that aspect of Hashem which is inspiring, which is overwhelming, which inspires a Jew for passionate love and passionate service of Hashem. The problem with Amalek is that he takes that aleph away. That's the problem with Amalek. In the parashas we had a couple weeks ago, we had a story of Yitzchak Avinu. It's one of the it's an unbelievable thing that we have very little in Chumash describing the life of Yitzchak Avinu. But the one thing we do have about Yitzchak Avinu is that there seems to be an unbelievable mission in Yitzchak's life to dig the wells that Avram Avinu once dug when he was alive. We know Avram Avinu dug a lot of wells. The problem was that Pelishtim came vayisatmum Pelishtim, that the Pelishtim covered the wells, they closed the wells. And Yitzchak Avinu, there was a whole avodah with Yitzchak to uncover those wells. What does that mean? What does it mean vayisatmum Pelishtim? There's a Alpi Drush. The Storm say vayisatmum Pelishtim means that the Pelishti comes, and the Pelishti is the Eitzahar, and he comes to a Jew. He doesn't tell a Jew, not immediately anyway, he doesn't tell a Jew break Shabbos. He doesn't tell a Jew don't put on tefillin. Vayisatmum Pelishtim. He says stam. He makes a Jew feel stam. What does it mean stam? It means whatever. Just lethargic. Vayisatmum Pelishtim means from the lashon of stam, that he made the avoid of the Pelishtim. What the Pelishtim are trying to do is vayisatmum, to make everything stam. The avoid of Yitzchak was to uncover those walls, to take away that stam, and to try to bring inspiration to the everyday shachris, the everyday mincha, the everyday the every week Shabbos, to make it not stam. But that's the avoid of the Pelishtim. That's what Amalek wants. Amalek wants to make things just stam by putting that block. So the question is, what's the Eitzah? What do we do? Until, like I mentioned last week on Maisa, again, I'll just mention it quickly. But again, there was a Jew that went to just very much bekitzer. A Jew went to the Rishner for a bracha. For all problems in his life, he had refuahs and yeshuas, he needed a million things. So the Rebbe said to him, again, I mentioned this just barichas, but now bekitzer, the Rebbe said to him, the Eibush is a halfen. Hashem should help. So the guy, after a whole thing, the guy responded back to Rebbe, no, but what am I going to do until Hashem helps? So the Rebbe responded, the Eibush is a helfen, biz the Eibush is a helfen. Hashem should help until he helps. So we know eventually Hashem's going to help. We know eventually the end of the story, which is the sun rose and Yaakov Avinu was healed. We know that. But what's going to be until then? So listen to this. Listen to what Rav Tzadok writes also. Rav Tzadok writes the following. He says like this: What's the antidote? The solution to this effect of the Malach of Esav? So he brings down from Chazal, B'zman shehakol kol Yaakov ein hayidayim yidei Esav. The solution we have when the pasuk says, the Chazal say, when the voice of Yaakov is strong, then the hands of Esav are weak. Because what's when a Jew learns? When a Jew learns, it doesn't matter if it's a pasuk in Chumash, if it's a Rashi, a Medrash. It doesn't make a difference. When a person is studying Torah, then Ein Esav Shalot, Esav has no power. Esav has no power. And he says, Ki lo yacholai, because the pasuk is, the Malach of Esav was unable to overtake Yaakov himself. Ki madrigasai, she Yaakov madrigas HaTorah, because Yaakov Avinu represents a Jew who's connected to Torah mitzvahs. When a Jew is connected to Torah mitzvahs, then you are infused with strength that the Malach of Esav has no power. What type of Jew is the Malach of Esav very overwhelming for? The Yotzei Yerechai, meaning Sheyotzei Min HaRishayim V'Am Ha'aretz, those people that run away from Torah. Those Jews that feel disconnected, that don't feel inspired at all, it's usually because of a lack of learning. Now, I want to explain this for a moment. This doesn't mean that a person has to, quit school and run to yeshiva or something and then, end his life. That's not what I'm talking about. The person has to remember that every single second that a person reads a pasuk in Chumash, that you think of a vart at any level, if you think about Hashem when it comes to davening or learning, any moment that a person is connected to Torah and mitzvahs, it gives a person an unbelievable strength. It breaks through that cloud of dust. That's what it means. It breaks through that cloud of dust. Let me read to you a few words from the Nefesh HaChaim. Listen to this. Those in the morning we're learning Nefesh HaChaim over here. So we're not this far in, but listen to what the Nefesh HaChaim writes. This is written by Reb Chaim Volozhiner. He says like this: whenever a person begins to learn, again, it doesn't matter what. Whenever a person begins to learn, it's proper for him to take a moment before. I'll call upon him just a little bit, a second, whatever it might be. To think about, to try to prepare himself emotionally, to try to prepare himself for the unbelievable event that he's about to take upon himself, which is to learn. He says, why? What's happening? He says, because when a person learns, because when a person learns, again, the simplest pasuk in Chumash, when a person learns even the simplest pasuk in Chumash, it means you're connecting in the most deep way to Hashem Himself. Unbelievable thing for a person without Torah, without a pasuk in Chumash, a person to connect to have that level of attachment to Hashem that a Jew has when he learns a pasuk in Chumash. It would take lifetimes of meditation, lifetimes of fasting, lifetimes of self-infliction to reach that level that any of us reach when we simply read a pasuk in Chumash. We have no idea the unbelievable gift that we have, that Hashem gave us on Har Sinai. We have no idea. Through that moment of just thinking about the Torah of Hashem, a person is unbelievably attached to Hashem Himself. Hashem and His Chachma, Hashem and His wisdom, which is the Torah, is one. It's one. The Baal Tanya gave a mashal of this. Baal Tanya said, if there's a king, and the king is wearing a lot of clothing, and you give a hug to the king. So Baal Tanya said, you're hugging the king. Yes, there's clothing in between, but that's still called you're hugging the king. He says when a person learns, it doesn't matter what level of learning, it doesn't matter what depth, it doesn't make a difference. You're hugging the king at that moment. There's leathers, there's clothing on the king, fine, many layers of clothing, but you're hugging the king at that moment. There's an unbelievable level of attachment to Hashem that each and every one of us is given the opportunity to tap into every single moment. The chol din, every halacha, V'halacha mitar kedusha, any rule, any halacha that's found in the Torah, who ritzon yisbarach is mamish Hashem's will. Shekain gaz ritzoni sheyeh kach hadin. Hashem decreed that the halacha should be that this is kosher and this is not kosher. This is aser, this is mutter. Whenever a person studies anything in Torah, we're tapping into an unbelievable power. He says, "V'gam hum oisek b'divrei agadata." It doesn't have to be halacha. If a person's learning agadata, if he's learning medrash, she'ein b'hem nafkus l'shum din, which doesn't have any practical ramifications. Gam kein hu davik b'dibur shel Kadosh Baruch Hu. At that moment, you're also connected to Hashem in an unbelievable way. Ki Torah kula, because all of Torah, bichlaleha upratea b'dikdukea, the biggest levels, the smallest details. It doesn't make a difference when a person is tapped into that. Then you're bypassing the whole system. You're connecting to Hashem Himself. You understand, in the system that Hashem made for us, the world that we see, there's levels. If a person wants to attach to Hashem in the normal situation of things, there's a certain protocol, there's certain levels a person has to go through. The problem is that along the way, Esav is blocking. And along the way, the cloud of dust is blocking us tapping into the Kisei HaKavod. But Hashem gave us a gift, Hashem gave us an Eitz Chaim, a way of escaping it all. The way of escaping it all is simply just opening the Chumash. Opening the Chumash. We have no idea how powerful that is. Unbelievable powerful. You know, there's a story, I might have said this over, there's a Maisa with, before the war, there was one of the great Rosh Yeshivas of pre-war Europe, his name was Reb Baruch Ber Leibovitz. And he was Rosh Yeshiva of the Yeshiva of Kametz, one of the most illustrious yeshivas of those days. So the story was that he was by a Gula convention, with a lot of Rabbanim, and they were, rabbis were getting up and giving drushes about whatever it is that they felt was the issue of the day. So one rabbi got up and he was talking about, helping yeshivas out financially and whatever. And he mentioned, because learning for the Jew, learning is like oxygen. Learning is like oxygen. You can't live without oxygen. You can't live without learning. So in the middle of the speech, Reb Baruch Ber was there's a lot of stories. Reb Baruch Ber was a very passionate, he was a very aggressive type of person. So he right in the middle of the speech, he jumps out of his chair and he says, "I'm moicha. I have to say something. I can't let that go." He says, "Chas v'shalom. Torah is not oxygen. Why? Because what's oxygen? Oxygen is that you have life. Just the only way to maintain life is through oxygen. That's not what Torah is." He said, Reb Baruch Ber said, Torah is life itself. Torah is life itself. It's not, you don't maintain life with Torah. Torah is life itself. We have so many stories of our history. It's so important for a Jew to remember this. And again, like I said, it doesn't matter. It could be, even a niggin could be Torah. Even a niggin could be Torah. If a person sings a niggin and a person davens properly, that's also called Torah. There's also a level of attachment to Hashem that a person is able to tap into by anything like this. And these are the keys that Hashem gave us, and it's an unbelievable gift. We can't let this, we have to remember this. We have to remember also, again, we have to remember two things in this parsha. That as difficult as life might be, as difficult as situations will come, and they will come. They have come and they will come. There are times where you feel uninspired. There are times where we feel like, if I was in Yerushalayim, if I was in a yeshiva somewhere in Eretz Yisrael or something, if I had, Shlomo Karbach right here singing a niggin to me, then I feel something, But now I don't have that, so what could I do? We have to remember two things. We have to remember that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. We have to remember that Yaakov Avinu ultimately was healed. That's what we have to remember. That's Aleph. And Beis, we also have to remember that even Biz Deivish is a help, and until Hashem helps, He also gave us help. And the help that He gave us is Kol Yaakov, the voice of Yaakov Avinu, of learning and davening. This is the voice of Yaakov Avinu that gives us strength until Yaakov Avinu is healed completely. This is what we have to remember from the parsha. And again, Chazal mentioned that it was in this parsha whenever the Tanoim, whenever the great rabbis of history had to deal with Goyim and had to deal with difficulties with Esavs in their lives, they always looked in this parsha for chizuk. And this is what we have to follow in their ways. It has to be the chizuk that we have to come from. We have to always remember that every struggle that we are going through, it's coming from this. It's not because Hashem has abandoned us, chas v'shalom. It's not coming from that. Chas v'shalom, Hashem never abandons. The problem is that there's a blockage, there's a cloud, there's some sort of mysterious covering that's taking place. But it's not because Hashem left us. We have to try to bypass that cloud by screaming to Hashem. And I've mentioned this before. The Sefer Marav Shemesh writes, Parashat Shemais, when the Jewish people were in Mitzrayim, when they were in Galus of Mitzrayim, in the depths of Galus, and they had nothing. This is before the Jewish people were given the Torah. They don't have the Torah, they have nothing. They have nothing. So the pasuk says, "V'yaltza kasam Elokim and Havodah," that their screaming came to Hashem. They're screaming from the hard work of Galus. So the Marav Shemesh writes, there comes a point in time where in a Jew where sometimes you feel completely uninspired, where even davening, even learning is not doing it. So Marav Hashem says at that point in time, you know what you have to do? Put down the siddur for a moment and just scream. Doesn't mean literally in Milshman Essay just scream like a crazy person. But inside the heart. B'mamakim Kursich Hashem. Like David said, I'm calling you, Hashem, from the inner part of my heart. I'm screaming inside. That's what a Jew sometimes has to do. You have to forget all that and just to scream. And sometimes just a simple scream of a Jewish heart has an unbelievable way of piercing things. Unbelievable way of piercing the cloud. Unbelievable way. And it has to come from honesty. The person has to be honest with himself. The person has to go to Hashem and honestly say to Hashem, please, I'm feeling blockage. I'm feeling that there's some sort of blockage. I can't penetrate. I can't see through the cloud of this world. And Hashem, please help me. Let me be able to find strength from reading a pasuk in Chumash. Let me be able to find strength from saying a kapitel Tehillim. Let me be able to find strength in my average day. That's something that a Jew has to remember. Always to try to find chizik and to scream and to try to always remember that there is, it's just a cloud. It doesn't mean that there's no kucharichu there. It's just a question of penetrating that cloud and remembering that there is Hashem on the other side. There is Hashem on the other side. Let me end off with a Maisa. This is a Maisa, I just thought of it, but not that I didn't make it up just now, it just popped into my head. The Maisa goes that the Baal Shem Tov was once traveling with a bunch of his Chassidim in Russia, in that border between Poland and Russia. And it was during the winter. And he was passing by a lake, which during that time in the winter was frozen over. So he's passing over that lake, and what was going on wasn't a specifically Jewish area. There was a lot of guys that were, skating on the lake, and the kids were playing around by the ice and so on. So they passed by, and the Baal Shem Tov noticed something. He noticed that there was a group of little guyim, and they were etching into the ice a cross. They were etching a cross into the ice. Okay, fine. So not what's the big deal? Whatever. So all the Chassidim continue walking on. The Baal Shem Tov somehow it caught his eye, and he became fixated on it. He was really just staring at it. So the Chassidim are wondering, first of all, what is he seeing over here? And second of all, he's staring at a cross, like what's going on? So after the whole thing was over and the kids left, the Baal Shem Tov calmed down. So the Baal Shem Tov said to the Chassidim, he said, look at this. Water, before it froze, what was this like before it froze? It was water. It was life-giving. There was life in the water. There was fish. Unbelievable. All human life, all natural life is dependent on water. So much life. But what happens when the water froze over? When it became cold as ice? The same thing that gave life, that gave energy, that gives spirit to all life, when it becomes frozen, it could become an idol itself. It could become mamish like an avodah zarah. That's what happened with this lake. When it's still liquid, it gives life to everything. When it becomes frozen, it becomes a cross. So what's the eitzah? So what's the problem? What made it become frozen? Said the Baal Shem Tov, it stopped flowing from its source. That's what happened. Because you're not going to stop the winter. The winter is going to come. It's going to be cold outside. What's the eitzah? What should the water have done? When water continues to flow from its source, when it continues to reconnect to its beginnings, when it continues to flow from its source, then all the cold in the air is not going to make it frozen. That momentum will keep it going. The problem is that the water disconnected itself from its source, and it became stagnant. When it became stagnant, it became frozen, and when it became frozen, it became an idol. So Baal Shem Tov said that's what a Jew has to remember. All the winter of this world have no power over us. They have no way to stop us from becoming inspired and connected to Hashem as long as we stay moving. As long as we stay connected to the source. As long as we stay and when we keep it going. We keep Shabbos. We daven. We learn, we keep things going. As long as we keep it going, the water won't freeze. The problem is when we stop, then there's a possibility of freezing over. But if we keep it going, the water won't freeze, and eventually we'll be life-giving. Eventually we'll give life. So we should remember this and be mechazik ourselves with this. And if we do, and if we continue, just what Yaakov Avinu did, he just trekked along. His thigh hurt, it was dislocated, but the pasuk says he continued walking. He continued going. That didn't stop him. Even though he felt uninspired, and he felt there was a blockage. You keep on going, and you keep on persevering, and ultimately we'll be zeicha the same way Yaakov Avinu was zeicha, that the sun will shine, and will be healed with Bias